first thing I want to do is remove the wheel just to give me more access behind it here. If you have these hubcaps with a 19mm socket, remove these plastic covers that actually hold this onto the wheel. There we go, set that aside. Remove the wheel. With a 7mm, let's remove this little screw here. And then we'll remove the 4 push clips that hold the rest of this panel. Grab your trim tool, and you have to pop the center out first. That'll unlock them, and then you remove the whole thing. Just go around and remove all of them. Sometimes these get really stuck here because of the sand, road debris that gets in there. So if yours are really stuck, sometimes rust penetrant actually helps to make them slide out easier. Okay, and there's 2 on the bottom. There we go. Now this can get pulled down. Just like that. Okay, now with this shield off, you can see the belt and the tensioner up there. And the tensioner, you'll need a 3/8 drive tool. If you have a 3/8 breaker bar, that will work. If not, you'll probably need a serpentine belt tool because a ratchet is too thick or too deep and it won't fit in here. So I have a serpentine belt tool here that I'm going to use. Get the head right in here. Make sure it's pressed in so that it actually engages and doesn't strip out that hole. Okay, remove tension off the belt. And then you can remove the belt from wherever is easiest for you to reach. Once that's off, you can release the tool and get it out of there. Take the belt off. So next I want to disconnect the battery just so I can avoid shorting anything out or potentially making sparks or anything like that. You don't want to ruin your electronics. We have the cargo version of this vehicle here, so I don't know if this is going to be the same for the non-cargo version, but for this, the battery's in the trunk underneath these covers. So remove all of these plastic panels, and underneath you will find the spare tire and the battery, which is right underneath this area here. Okay, so I removed this just for camera purposes. And here you'll see the negative terminal. This is the one you want to disconnect. 10mm socket, remove this nut here. And once this is removed, or at least loosened up, you can remove the connector. There we go. Remove this, set it aside so it can't make contact while we're working. Okay, so I'm going to remove this engine cover / air filter housing, undo the mass airflow sensor connection, set that aside, and then with an 8mm I'm going to remove this hose clamp. Well, you don't have to remove it actually, you just have to loosen it up a little bit. Once you do that, you can actually slide off the housing off of this air intake here. So pop this up. It just sits in some rubber retainers on the back, and then if you wiggle it, it'll walk its way off of this, and then you can just set it up and out of your way. I'm going to remove this bracket here, and that's just going to allow me to have more space to pull out the alternator. 2 13mm bolts, and remove them. That's going to let go of the bracket. Oops, remove the bracket. I'm going to remove this hose now, again, so I can have more room to pull the alternator out. I'm using hose clamp pliers, but you can just use regular pliers if you can get them in here somehow. And coolant will come out at this point. This car does not have a drain for the radiator, so my clamp just broke, so I guess I'll finish breaking it off the rest of the way, and then I'll have to replace it with a new one. There we go, there's the rest of the hose clamp. That's fine, it fell on the ground. At this point, let's break this free from here. I'm going to try and give this a couple twists with pliers to break it free. It's pretty corroded on here. There we go. You have to do this, be gentle, don't squeeze too much because you don't want to break the hose or damage the fitting that it goes onto. Again, coolant will come out at this point. So pop this up, and then I'm actually going to disconnect this clamp right here so I can remove this hose, and then we'll get the other end off of the radiator. All right. The other end is on the radiator, so pull this plastic piece back, and you can grab it with some pliers. Squeeze it, remove the clamp. That's how it should come off. And then you can remove the hose. If you just give it a couple twists and a couple shakes, it should slide right off the radiator. Now you can set this aside, and you have a lot more room to work here. I'm going to remove this overflow tank here with a 10mm. Remove that bolt that holds it on to the fans. Pull that off. There it is. Now you can pull this overflow up and out. Let's unplug the electrical connector for the alternator. Grab the locking tab, and this one seems to be kind of stuck on here. Sometimes needle nose pliers can help you remove these just because you can get a little more leverage on them. Like that. Be careful not to break them though, because you can have too much leverage. There we go. Pull that out, and then right underneath it you'll see this rubber boot here. That is what covers the main power wire, so we'll have to pop this off. There it is. Okay, let's grab a wrench and remove the nut here so we can move the power wire off. With a 13mm, let's remove this nut. Pretty tight. There we go. Once you break it free, you should be able to just take it off by hand. There it is. You can slide the wire right off. Set that aside. At this point, we have this bracket here with the two 13mm bolts, and then there's one bolt underneath which I can't even see, but I can feel it. It's right here. So with a 13mm socket, let's break these free. Okay, those are free. See if this one will break free. Where is it? There it is. Okay, they're all broken free, and now just for some extra speed, I'm going to use my air ratchet on these. That's off. Those are off. Pull these off, and right through where we remove the upper radiator hose, you can actually see this bottom bolt. Okay, that's off. The alternator is going to want to drop down when you remove this, and now you can pull the alternator right up and out. All right, let's get the new alternator down to where it needs to go and line it up. Grab a couple bolts, and I'm going to start them in at the top first just because it's easier to reach, and then it'll stay in place. Let's see, right there. You'll have to find the right angle to start in this bolt. I guess it doesn't really want to start. Let's try the other one. And, oh, there it is. Got it. Okay, that one started. Let's try starting this one. And that one just dropped into its threads, so that's perfect. Let's start the bottom. Oh, there we go. That one is started as well. Let's snug them up and then I'll torque them. Okay. I'm just gonna first snug it up with my ratchet, that way it's at least close. Right there. Okay, now let's torque them. That's 1. 16 foot-pounds for all 3 of these bolts. 2. And last one on the bottom there. Perfect. Make sure this main wire is clean. If it's corroded, it won't make a good contact, and then you'll have issues with charging the battery. So make sure it's clean. Mine is. If not, you can sand it down a little bit and put the new supplied nut on here. Then we'll snug it up. You want to be careful when you snug these up because you don't want to twist this whole stud internally in the alternator, so you don't have to make it extra tight. Just tight is good. This is loosening. Okay, that's bottomed out. Give it a nice snug right there. That's perfect. And don't forget to put the rubber boot on. That's going to protect it from water and debris. Make sure it's sealed up. And let's plug in this connector here. Make sure that clicks and locks on. Let's slide this onto the radiator all the way. And we'll get the hose clamp on. Make sure the hose is bottomed out completely. Release the hose clamp. It's not really where I want it, so I'm gonna adjust it right there. Nope, that's still not where I want it. There we go. Now before we go too far, let's install the overflow. It's got this tab here that lines up with that slot down there that you see on the fan shroud. So slide it down, make sure it gets seated into place, and then let's reinstall this little 10mm screw or bolt that holds it on. Now that this little bolt is started, let's snug it up. Perfect. Let's get this upper hose back. Make sure it bottoms out on the engine. I got a new hose clamp for this. This is a little too tight, so loosen it up. There we go. Now I can slide on. There we go. Snug it up. I'm using a new clamp, so it's an 8mm, but if you still have your original one, just use your pliers. If you are replacing it and you're using one of these clamps, just make sure you don't over tighten it because they do easily break. Once it gets over tightened, it'll just internally strip out. So make it snug, that's perfect. And at this point, we can put this hose back. Make sure this is completely bottomed out as well. Let's grab the hose clamp. There we go, set it back to where it was. Let's get this bracket back on. Try to line up the bolt holes, start in the 2 13mm bolts, snug them up, and then just make them nice and tight. This bracket is here so you can lift up the engine if you for some reason need to, so just make sure it's, tight. Okay, let's snug it up with the ratchet. Okay, bottom one, nice and snug. At this point, grab this cover and line it up with this hose here. I'll actually put it on the back first. So press it on, make sure it's bottomed out completely, and then on the back, it's hard to see, but you actually have two tabs that it's supposed to slide down on. Oops. Okay, let's reconnect the mass airflow sensor. Make sure it clicks on, and then let's tighten up this hose clamp. Nice and snug. Let's get the belt back on. If it fell off completely for you, just put it back on the AC compressor. Slide it up and over the alternator. At this point, release tension. So you can slide this under the tensioner, over the harmonic balancer. Make sure it stays in its grooves here. And it fell off the alternator, so I'm going to resituate it. Okay, so it's on the alternator again. It's on the AC compressor. It's all the way around here, and it's on the tensioner. So now I can release tension. Make sure it's sitting on all the pulleys properly. Now I can remove my tool. Now that this is all in place, after I start the car and run it for about 2-3 3 seconds. I'm actually going to turn it off and come back. The reason I want to do that is to make sure this belt is on all the ribs everywhere, especially in places where I can't see, such as at the top on the alternator, to make sure, even though I'm feeling for it, if it's off just one tooth, it'll just shred itself to pieces if it runs like that. So that's why I only want to run it for a few seconds. And once that's done, we can cover this back up with our plastic shield. Push it up into place here. Lock them in. Now we just have this little 7mm bolt. Perfect. Let's get the wheel on. Start all 5 of your lug nuts, snug them up, and we'll torque them to 100 foot-pounds. Okay, 100 foot-pounds. Okay, let's get this hubcap on. When you put it on, you want to make sure that this cutout here lines up with the valve stem. Otherwise, if it doesn't, it'll just crush it. So line that up, and then these caps should also line up with the lug nuts. And you want to just screw them on gently by hand. Don't use an air tool on them because they're just plastic, so they'll break. This is what holds on your hubcap, so if you don't tighten these down, this will go flying on the road. So make sure these are snug. Let's get this negative battery terminal connected. Press it down, make sure it's down all the way. You want it to make a good connection, and snug up this 10mm nut here. That's tight. And now let's put back any covers that might have been removed. Press that back down. Let's get this back in place. And finally, this top cover. All right, at this point, we are ready to fill the cooling system since since coolant came out. So remove the radiator cap, well, coolant cap, I guess. And I have this special funnel that helps me bleed it and not spill anything, so I'm installing my adapter. That's going to hold this down. Okay, and because this engine cover is in the way, I'm going to put a couple adapters here to bend it out of my way. Let's get the funnel on. Now we can fill it with some coolant. If you're not sure what to use, just check your owner's manual. I'm using universal, but basically just fill it until it stops bubbling. Once it stops bubbling, we'll run the engine and bleed it that way. And when you do that, when you run the engine, you basically want to have your heat on. Make it as hot as you can get it. That way the coolant will circulate through the heater core and push out all the air that might be stuck in there. And then you want to run it until it reaches operating temperature. You can look at the gauge on your dash, but also you want to check your cooling fans. Make sure the cooling fan comes on. Once it does come on to cool down the engine, that's when you know it has reached full operating temperature, at which point you can shut it off. And of course, as the engine is running, this might drain a little bit because it's pushing air out and sucking coolant in, so just top it off as needed. You want to have this funnel about a quarter of the way full. That way this is the highest point in the cooling system and the air naturally wants to come out. So now that this has all gone down, let's fill it some more. At this point it stopped bubbling by itself. Well, there's a couple small bubbles, but basically it stopped bubbling a lot. So I'm just going to massage this lower radiator hose a little bit. That's going to push out some remaining air. And at this point, let's start the vehicle and run it. Okay, let's turn on the car. And you come down to the heat. Make sure the heat is all the way at the hottest point and turn the fan on. You don't have to max it out or anything, just on low is fine. The important part is that the heat is on, AC off. You don't want the AC, And we'll just make it go to the vents, that way I can feel the heat once it starts coming out. Yep, I can feel air, so that's good. And now we'll just let this run till it warms up. That way produces heat. You want the coolant circulating through the heater core and, well, feeding heat through here. Now I ran the vehicle, it warmed up, it bled, everything is good, it stopped bubbling. I'm going to cap off my funnel here and remove it. And we'll get the radiator cap installed. Put this back, screw it on, make sure it's nice and tight, no leaks. And right there. And right next to the radiator cap is the overflow, coolant overflow tank cap. So remove it. Let's pour the rest of our coolant in here. There we go. At this point, if you look on the side of it, you'll see the full and the low mark. It's full. So at this point, you're ready to go for a road test.